My friends, what I am about to share with you tonight will fundamentally alter your understanding of consciousness itself. And more importantly, it will reveal to you the most profound secret that has been hiding in plain sight within the pages of Scripture for nearly 2,000 years. A secret so powerful that once you grasp its true meaning, you will never again wonder whether your desires can become reality. For you will know with absolute certainty that they already are reality in the realm of imagination, waiting only for your recognition and acceptance to manifest in what we call the physical world. Tonight, we are going to explore what the ancients called the mind of Christ, but not as theologians have interpreted it, not as moralists have reduced it to mere ethical behavior, but as the mystics have always known it to be, a state of consciousness so elevated, so aligned with the fundamental creative principle of existence, that it serves as a literal portal between the world of imagination, where all things exist in their perfect state, and this world of shadows and reflections, where we experience the outpicturing of our inner convictions. But before we dive into the depths of this mystery, let me tell you something that will shake you to your very core. Every single person who has ever walked this earth and accomplished anything truly extraordinary, every individual who has ever transcended their circumstances and created miracles in their life, has discovered and applied these very principles, whether they called them by the name of Christ consciousness or universal mind, or the creative power of assumption. For there is only one power, one presence, one law operating in all creation, and that is consciousness itself. Your consciousness, individualized and personalized as your own wonderful human imagination. Now, what I am about to share with you may surprise those who have been taught to think of Christianity as separate from or opposed to other spiritual traditions. The truth is that every great mystical system that has ever existed on this earth has taught the same fundamental principle, that consciousness is the creative power of the universe, that man is made in the image and likeness of this creative principle, and that through the proper use of imagination and assumption, any individual can transform their life and circumstances in ways that would appear miraculous to those who do not understand the law. The ancient Egyptians spoke of the neter, the divine principle within man that could reshape reality through focused intention and visualization, and their mystery schools taught initiates how to identify with this divine essence rather than with their physical form or circumstances, how to live from the consciousness of the God within rather than from the consciousness of the mortal without. The Hindu tradition teaches that Atman, the individual soul, and Brahman, the universal consciousness, are one and the same, and that the recognition of this unity dissolves all sense of separation and limitation, revealing the individual as nothing less than the creative power of the universe, temporarily forgetting its true nature, but always capable of remembering and reclaiming its divine inheritance. The Buddhist understanding of the void or emptiness points to the same truth, that what we call solid reality is actually the projection of consciousness, that all phenomena arise from and return to the fundamental creative principle that the Buddhists call Buddha nature, which is not different from what Christians call the Christ within, or what mystics of all traditions recognize as the divine spark of creative imagination that dwells at the heart of every human being. But here is what makes the Christian revelation so uniquely powerful and practical. Jesus did not merely teach these principles philosophically or metaphysically. He demonstrated them physically and historically. He showed us exactly what happens when a human being fully realizes and embodies their divine nature, when someone completely identifies with the creative principle rather than with appearances, when consciousness operates without the interference of doubt, fear, or limitation. Now you might ask yourself, how can this be? How can consciousness alone be responsible for the world I see around me? And this is where modern science begins to catch up with ancient wisdom. For quantum physics has revealed to us that matter, at its most fundamental level, is not solid substance, but rather organized energy, patterns of possibility that collapse into specific realities only when observed by consciousness itself. The double-slit experiment, conducted countless times in laboratories around the world, demonstrates beyond any shadow of doubt that the very act of conscious observation determines whether energy manifests as particles or waves, whether potentiality becomes actuality, whether the quantum field of infinite possibilities crystallizes into specific, measurable phenomena. And this is not theory or speculation. This is repeatable, verifiable scientific fact. Dr. John Wheeler, one of the most respected physicists of the 20th century, stated that consciousness is the fundamental reality, and what we call matter is merely consciousness acting upon itself, echoing almost exactly what Jesus taught when he declared that the kingdom of heaven is within you, that the creative power of God operates through your own consciousness, that what you bind on earth through your assumptions and beliefs is bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth through your change in consciousness is loosed in heaven. The field of epigenetics has shown us that our beliefs and mental states directly influence which genes are expressed in our physical bodies, that consciousness literally rewrites the biological programs that determine our health, our longevity, our physical capabilities and limitations, proving scientifically what mystics have always known, that consciousness is senior to matter, that mind shapes body, that our inner state determines our outer experience in ways that are measurable, predictable, and completely within our conscious control. What Jesus understood, what every mystic who has ever walked this earth has discovered, is that consciousness does not emerge from matter. Rather, matter emerges from consciousness, and the quality of consciousness, the specific state or feeling tone of awareness that we habitually maintain, determines the nature of the world that unfolds around us. But now let me tell you something that will change everything for you. This power, this Christ consciousness, this ability to walk between worlds and command reality to conform to your vision, is not the exclusive property of one man who lived 2,000 years ago. It is your birthright, your natural inheritance as a being made in the image and likeness of the creative principle itself. The portal that Jesus opened and walked through is the same portal that stands open before you this very moment, and that portal is your own wonderful human imagination, elevated to the level of absolute conviction, charged with the feeling of reality, infused with the certainty that what you imagine is more real than what your senses report to you about your current circumstances. For you see, when Paul declared, "We have the mind of Christ," he was speaking in the present tense, not about some future attainment or reward for good behavior, but about the immediate availability of this transformative consciousness to anyone who will dare to assume the feeling of their wish fulfilled and persist in that assumption until it hardens into fact in their outer experience. Imagination is not fantasy. Imagination is not daydreaming. Imagination is not escape from reality. Imagination is the very mechanism through which reality is created, the divine faculty through which consciousness projects itself into form and experience, the bridge between the invisible world of pure potentiality and the visible world of manifested actuality. When you imagine yourself already in possession of what you desire, when you feel the reality of your wish fulfilled, when you assume the state of consciousness that corresponds to your dream already realized, you are not pretending or make-believing, you are actually occupying that state in the only realm where it can be occupied before it manifests physically. You are claiming your desire in the world of causes, so that it must inevitably appear in the world of effects. This is why Jesus taught his disciples to pray, believing that they had already received what they asked for, why he instructed them to thank God before the miracle occurred rather than after, why he consistently demonstrated the principle of living from the end rather than living from the beginning. Because he understood that consciousness creates by assumption, that what you assume to be true about yourself and your world must become true in your experience. Because consciousness has no choice but to express itself, to outpicture itself, to create conditions and circumstances that match its inner conviction and expectation. And here is something that will revolutionize your understanding of what faith really means. Faith is not believing despite the evidence. Faith is not hoping that God will eventually answer your prayers if you ask sincerely enough or wait patiently enough. Faith is the actual feeling of your wish fulfilled. It is consciousness occupying the state that corresponds to your desire already realized, already accomplished, already yours in the world of imagination, where all things exist in their perfect and completed form. When the woman with the issue of blood touched the hem of Jesus' garment and was instantly healed, Jesus perceived that power had gone out from him because he was operating from a consciousness so thoroughly identified with wholeness, with perfection, with the unlimited creative power of God, that anyone who came into resonance with that frequency, anyone who matched that vibration of absolute conviction, immediately experienced the manifestation of their own healing assumption. This is not mysterious. This is not supernatural in the sense of being beyond natural law. This is the most natural thing in the world when you understand that consciousness is the substance of all that exists, and that like attracts like, that consciousness resonates with consciousness, that the feeling you maintain about yourself and your world creates an attractive field that draws to you the circumstances and experiences that match your inner state. But here is where most people fail to understand the true nature of faith. They think faith requires the absence of doubt. They believe they must maintain perfect mental control and never allow a negative thought to enter their minds. They exhaust themselves trying to force positive thinking and then wonder why their demonstrations are inconsistent or why their desired manifestations seem to take so long to appear. The truth is that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the persistence of assumption. Despite the presence of doubt, faith is not perfect mental control, but the consistent return to your desired state. Whenever you become aware that you have wandered from it, faith is not forcing positive thoughts, but gently and persistently occupying the feeling of your wish fulfilled, until that feeling becomes more familiar, more natural, more real to you than your current circumstances. Jesus himself experienced doubt and fear. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me," acknowledging the natural human response to difficult circumstances. But then he immediately returned to his fundamental assumption of divine will and purpose, declaring, "Nevertheless, not my will but thine be done," demonstrating that faith is not the absence of human emotions, but the consistent choice to identify with divine rather than human consciousness, to live from the level of spirit rather than from the level of flesh, to maintain your assumption of good, despite temporary fluctuations in feeling or confidence. Now I want you to understand something profound about the nature of transformation. You cannot change your world by fighting against what you do not want. You cannot create a new reality by struggling against your current circumstances. For struggle itself is a state of consciousness that perpetuates the very conditions you are trying to escape. The art that Jesus mastered, the consciousness that he embodied and demonstrated, was the art of turning away from the evidence of the senses and turning toward the reality of imagination, the art of living from the end rather than living from the beginning, the art of assuming the feeling of your wish fulfilled and maintaining that assumption regardless of what your current circumstances might suggest about the likelihood or possibility of your desire coming to pass. When Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, he did not plead with God to perform a miracle. He did not hope that perhaps this time his prayer might be answered. No, he thanked God before the resurrection occurred, because he was operating from a level of consciousness that knows only completion, only fulfillment, only the eternal, now where all things exist in their perfect state, waiting only for recognition and acceptance. Consider the profound wisdom in Jesus' words when he declared, "It is finished." He was not referring merely to his physical crucifixion, but to the eternal truth that all creation is already complete in the mind of God, that every possible state, every conceivable condition, every imaginable experience already exists in the realm of pure consciousness, waiting only for individual awareness to claim it, to identify with it, to assume it as true. This is why the mystics of all traditions have taught that the spiritual path is not about becoming something you are not, but about remembering what you have always been, not about earning God's favor or developing supernatural powers, but about awakening to the divine nature that has never been absent from you, that constitutes the very essence of your being, that is the source and substance of your consciousness, and the creative power behind all your experiences. The ancient Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, points to this same truth. What exists in the realm of spirit must manifest in the realm of matter. What is true in consciousness must become true in experience. What is assumed in imagination must appear in manifestation, because there is only one power, one presence, one law, operating at every level of existence, and that is consciousness itself, your consciousness, forever creating your world according to the pattern of your dominant mental states and habitual inner conversations. And this brings us to the most practical and immediately applicable aspect of everything I am sharing with you tonight. You do not need to earn your good. You do not need to deserve your desires. You do not need to prove yourself worthy of the life you want to live. For you are already worthy by virtue of the fact that you can conceive of a better state. You can imagine a more beautiful experience. You can feel the reality of your wish fulfilled. The only thing standing between you and the realization of your every desire is your willingness to assume that you already are what you want to be, that you already have what you want to have, that you already experience what you want to experience, and to persist in that assumption until your outer world reshapes itself to conform to your inner conviction. This is what it means to have the mind of Christ. It means to think from your desire fulfilled, rather than thinking of your desire unfulfilled. It means to speak from the consciousness of having, rather than from the consciousness of wanting. It means to move through your world with the quiet confidence of one who knows that the creative power of the universe is always saying yes to your dominant mental state, always outpicturing your habitual inner conversations, always manifesting the world that corresponds to your level of self-definition and expectation. But let me share with you a secret that will accelerate your progress immeasurably. The speed and ease with which your assumptions manifest in your experience is directly proportional to the naturalness with which you can maintain them. The effortlessness with which you can occupy the state of your wish fulfilled, the simplicity with which you can feel yourself to be what you want to be without strain, without force, without the exhausting effort of trying to convince yourself of something that feels foreign or impossible. This is why Jesus taught, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light," not because the spiritual path requires no discipline or commitment, but because when you understand the law correctly, when you work with consciousness rather than against it, when you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled rather than trying to manifest through willpower or mental effort, the process becomes as natural as breathing, as simple as choosing to think one thought rather than another, as effortless as deciding to feel grateful instead of resentful, satisfied instead of lacking, confident instead of afraid. The great secret of assumption is that you do not create your desire. Your desire already exists in the infinite field of consciousness, already perfect, complete, yours by divine right. You simply identify with it. You simply claim it. You simply assume that you are the person who naturally and easily experiences what you want to experience, what you want to have, what you want to be. Now, many people ask me, "Neville, if consciousness is the only reality, if assumption creates facts, if imagination is God in action, then why don't my desires manifest instantly? Why is there often a time lag between my assumption and its manifestation? Why do some things appear quickly while others seem to take much longer?" And the answer to this question reveals one of the most profound aspects of how consciousness operates in what we call the three-dimensional world of time and space. Time is not an absolute reality, but a dimension of consciousness itself, a framework through which infinite possibility expresses itself in sequential, ordered manifestation, allowing for the development, growth, and perfection of individual awareness. The interval between assumption and manifestation serves several divine purposes. First, it allows consciousness to test its own conviction, to prove to itself the reality of its creative power, to develop faith through persistence rather than demanding instant gratification like a spoiled child who has not yet learned the beauty of sustained, focused intention. Second, the time interval allows for what we might call divine editing. As you maintain your assumption of the wish fulfilled, consciousness automatically adjusts and refines the manifestation to bring you not just what you asked for, but the perfect expression of what you really wanted, often in ways far more beautiful and harmonious than you could have specifically imagined. Third, the gestation period between conception and birth in consciousness parallels the gestation period in nature. Just as a seed does not instantly become a tree, just as a child does not instantly become an adult, the assumption of consciousness must be allowed to ripen, to mature, to develop all the necessary supportive conditions and circumstances that will allow your desire to manifest in the most perfect and sustainable way possible. Jesus understood this principle perfectly, which is why he taught, "In your patience possess ye your souls." Not patience as passive waiting or resignation to circumstances, but patience as the active maintenance of your assumption despite appearances, as the persistent return to the feeling of your wish fulfilled, regardless of how long the outer world takes to conform to your inner conviction. But here is something that will transform your relationship with time and manifestation forever. Instead of measuring your progress by external changes, instead of judging the effectiveness of your practice by how quickly things appear in your physical world, begin to measure your progress by the ease and naturalness with which you can maintain your desired state, by the consistency with which you can return to the feeling of your wish fulfilled, by the growing conviction that what you have assumed in consciousness must inevitably become fact in experience. For the truth is that every assumption you make, every state you occupy, every feeling you maintain is instantly creating its corresponding reality in the invisible realm of causes. And the physical manifestation is simply the automatic, inevitable outpicturing of what has already been established in consciousness. The delay is not in consciousness, but in matter, not in spirit, but in flesh, not in cause, but in effect. But now you may wonder, how do I actually apply this? How do I move from understanding these principles intellectually to experiencing their reality in my daily life? And the answer is beautifully simple, though it requires the kind of disciplined mental practice that most people are unwilling to undertake because they are addicted to the evidence of their senses, hypnotized by their current circumstances, convinced that what is must continue to be. The practice begins with the recognition that consciousness is the only reality, that your awareness, your sense of I am, is the creative principle itself, individualized as you, and that whatever you consistently assume to be true about yourself must manifest as your experience, because consciousness has no choice but to express itself, to outpicture itself, to create a world that matches its inner nature and conviction. Every morning when you awaken, before you allow your mind to become occupied with the problems and concerns that your current circumstances suggest, spend time in the secret place of consciousness, in the sanctuary of imagination, where you can assume the feeling of your life already transformed, your desires already fulfilled, your problems already solved in the most beautiful and harmonious way imaginable. But let me give you a specific technique that will make this practice incredibly powerful and effective. Instead of trying to visualize complex scenarios or detailed scenes, which can sometimes feel forced or artificial, simply ask yourself this question: how would I feel if my desire were already realized? What would be the natural, inevitable feeling tone of my consciousness if I were already the person I want to be? If I already had what I want to have? If I already experienced what I want to experience? And then, without effort or strain, without trying to convince yourself of anything, simply allow that feeling to arise naturally in your awareness. Allow it to permeate your consciousness like a gentle fragrance. Allow it to become the background feeling tone against which all your other thoughts and experiences occur throughout the day. This feeling, this simple, natural, effortless feeling of your wish fulfilled, is worth more than 1,000 affirmations, more powerful than the most elaborate visualization, more effective than any technique or method you could possibly employ. Because this feeling is the actual substance of your desire. This feeling is consciousness itself, assuming the shape of your fulfilled wish. This feeling is God in action, creating your world according to the pattern of your inner conviction. Feel yourself living from the end. Feel the satisfaction of your wishes realized. Feel the joy of obstacles overcome. Feel the gratitude of prayers answered. And do this not as a technique or method designed to manipulate reality from the outside, but as a recognition of what is already true in the world of imagination, as an acceptance of what is already yours by divine right, as an acknowledgement of what must inevitably manifest, because consciousness always expresses itself as experience. When doubts arise, when circumstances seem to contradict your assumptions, when well-meaning friends and family members try to convince you to be realistic about your limitations and the impossibility of your dreams, remember that Jesus was surrounded by doubters who laughed at him when he declared that the young girl was not dead, but only sleeping. And remember that he asked those doubters to leave the room before he performed the resurrection, because consciousness responds to the dominant vibration in any environment, and faith cannot operate freely in an atmosphere of doubt and disbelief. This is why it becomes so important to choose your mental environment with the same care that you would choose your physical environment, to select your inner conversations with the same discrimination that you would use in choosing your closest friends, to guard your consciousness with the same vigilance that you would guard your most precious possessions. For your consciousness is your most precious possession. Your awareness is the creative principle itself. Your imagination is the very power through which God creates and sustains the universe. But here is a profound secret that will liberate you from the exhausting effort of trying to maintain perfect thoughts or control every mental fluctuation. You do not need to be perfect in your practice. You do not need to maintain your assumption every single moment of every single day, or never have a doubt or fear or negative thought in order for your desires to manifest. What you need to do is this: whenever you become aware that you have strayed from your desired state, whenever you notice that you have returned to old patterns of thinking or feeling, whenever you catch yourself dwelling in the consciousness of lack or limitation or fear, simply and gently return to your assumption. Resume to the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Occupy again the state that corresponds to your desire already realized. This gentle, persistent return to your desired state is what develops the spiritual muscle of assumption. This consistent choice to identify with your fulfilled desire, rather than your present circumstances, is what gradually shifts the center of gravity of your consciousness from the world of effects to the world of causes, from the realm of appearances to the realm of reality, from the consciousness of man to the consciousness of God. This is why it is so important to guard your mental atmosphere with the same vigilance that you would guard your physical health, to choose your inner conversations with the same care that you would choose your closest friends, to select your mental images with the same discrimination that you would use in choosing art for your home. For your consciousness is your home. Your inner world is where you truly live. And the quality of that inner environment determines the nature of everything that manifests in your outer experience. When you truly understand this, when you realize that consciousness is cause and everything else is effect, you will stop looking to the world to change so that you can feel better about yourself and your circumstances. And you will begin the magnificent work of changing your conception of yourself so that the world must change to reflect your new level of awareness and expectation. You will realize that every circumstance in your life, whether you judge it as positive or negative, pleasant or unpleasant, wanted or unwanted, is simply consciousness externalized, the automatic outpicturing of your dominant mental states and habitual assumptions about yourself and your world. And therefore, every circumstance can be changed by changing consciousness. Every condition can be transformed by transforming your inner conversation, and every situation can be healed by healing your self-concept. This understanding brings tremendous freedom, because it means you are never at the mercy of external conditions, never dependent upon the cooperation of others, never limited by your past or your present circumstances. For consciousness is always free to assume a new state. Awareness is always capable of identifying with a higher possibility, and imagination is always able to conceive of and feel the reality of a more beautiful experience. But with this freedom comes tremendous responsibility. For once you understand that consciousness is the creative power behind all your experiences, you can no longer blame others for your difficulties. You can no longer make excuses for your failures. You can no longer claim to be a victim of circumstances beyond your control. because you will know that you are the author of your own experience, the creator of your own reality, the God of your own world, through the Christ consciousness that operates as your own divine imagination. This is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it means taking full responsibility for everything in your life, acknowledging that every condition you experience is the result of some assumption you have made about yourself or your world. Accepting that your outer experience is always a perfect mirror of your inner state, whether you are conscious of that state or not. But it is also infinitely empowering, because it means that no matter what your current circumstances may be, how difficult or challenging or seemingly impossible your situation may appear, you always have the power to change it by changing consciousness. You always have the ability to transform it by transforming your assumption, to heal it by healing your self-concept and assuming a new and better state. You will realize that every desire that has ever stirred your heart, every dream that has ever captured your imagination, every vision of a better life that has ever inspired you to reach beyond your current circumstances, is not a random occurrence or wishful thinking, but is actually the movement of the divine creative principle within you, calling you to expansion, calling you to growth, calling you to the full realization of your infinite potential as a being made in the image and likeness of consciousness itself. And you will understand that the resurrection that Jesus demonstrated is not something that happens after death, but something that can happen every moment of every day as you die to old concepts of limitation and lack and are reborn into new states of abundance and fulfillment. As you crucify the false beliefs that have kept you bound and rise into the glorious recognition of your true identity as the operant power of consciousness in your world. For death, in the mystical sense, is simply the abandonment of an old state of consciousness, and resurrection is the assumption of a new and higher state. And this process of dying and being reborn can happen as often as you choose to let go of what you have been and assume what you want to become, as frequently as you decide to release identification with your limitations and identify instead with your possibilities, as regularly as you choose to stop being the person who lacks what they want and start being the person who naturally and easily has what they desire. This is the true meaning of being born again, not a one-time religious conversion or emotional experience, but the continuous process of emerging from lower states of consciousness into higher states, of evolving from limited self-concepts into unlimited self-realization, of growing from the human consciousness that sees itself as separate from God into the Christ consciousness that knows itself to be one with the divine creative principle. Every time you assume a better state, every time you identify with a higher possibility, every time you choose to feel grateful instead of resentful, abundant instead of lacking, confident instead of afraid, you are experiencing a resurrection. You are demonstrating the power of consciousness to rise above circumstances. You are proving that spirit is senior to matter, that mind is more powerful than conditions, that assumption creates facts regardless of what the facts appear to be. Let me leave you with one final thought that will seal everything I have shared with you tonight, deep into your consciousness. The greatest miracle is not the transformation of your outer circumstances, though that will surely follow as night follows day when you understand and apply these principles. The greatest miracle is the transformation of your inner awareness, the awakening to your true identity as the divine creative principle individualized. The recognition that you are not a human being seeking a spiritual experience, but rather a spiritual being having a human experience, temporarily forgetting your divine nature, but always capable of remembering, always able to reclaim your birthright as the son or daughter of the Most High, always empowered to demonstrate through your own experience that with God, which is your consciousness, all things are possible. The portal is open, the way is clear, the power is yours. Not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, not when you become more worthy or spiritual or deserving, but now, in this eternal moment, where all creation exists, where all possibilities live, where all dreams wait to be born into the world of form, through the magnificent creative power of consciousness itself. operating as your own divine imagination, forever and always your faithful servant, ready to give you the kingdom that has been prepared for you from the foundation of the world, ready to manifest in your experience every good thing that you can conceive and believe and assume to be true about yourself and your wonderful, infinite, eternally abundant life.